So when I was like 17, I moved to Boston. And in Boston, there was like, I mean, it's the United States, so you can't even go into a bar, but like you can go to the club. So there would be all these like queer club nights, and I kind of moved around from different places. But there was just like this thing about being in the club, which was that like, you dance kind of big. Like the point is that you like make space and you like push up against people and they like push back. So you have something to like push against. And it was this like affirmation of being there together. Not like you're sort of like sexy dancing on someone, like that's something different. But like this kind of collective, this like collective culture, behavior of just like pushing back against people a bit. So like the bigger you dance, sort of like the more like the crowd came in towards you, and like the best part, or like what everyone hoped, is that like the crowd gets thick enough that you are like kind of surrounded, and there's this like swelling of like everyone dancing together, and then like the air kind of like coming back and filling that space in like a vacuum, and it breathes. And then I moved to Europe, and I like went to the dance floor, and it's like really not like that. Like if you like dance big or you like move, then people like move out of your way instead of like sort of like pushing towards you. And so like obviously like if you're doing something to like elicit a response, like if you're like leaning out and then like somebody moves instead of like pushing back, although like energetically, not like physically, right? But still like it's unnerving, because then you're like you're in empty space, like no one is pushing back against you. And so I was like been thinking a lot about this, and just like how having something to push against like creates a structure for it creates a structure. And I was thinking about it, and I saw that like that similarity, it pushed through like into language. So in Spanish there's this, in like each syllable there's kind of like this call and response where like it goes out and it comes back. And the more I started thinking about it, I felt like kind of like everything in Spanish is somehow like a call and response, in that like there's a underlying like energetic, subtle like echolocation that happens, that like gives you the landscape of where you are, but it's like you have the shape of the space behind you because you're like constantly engaging in provocation, and it's this like sort of constant way of spatializing yourself into like where you are and who you're with and like what's happening, and like giving you like some sense of like this single, like you in this like single point of space, and like constantly evolving social dynamics and whatever. And in English, like that kind of call and response isn't really there, but somehow it's like was still there, like in the social environment, in the social culture of it. Yeah, and so there's this Italian artist, Jacopo Miliani, and he made this film about discotheques in Italy in the 1990s and 1980s. And so he made this film, and then he had some sculptures, and he like wrote a book, or published a book, and it's this collection of like all the research that went into making the film. And it starts with an essay, and it talks about how like the club is this space that like doesn't make sense unless it's filled. And then he like sort of says, well, like, yeah, but that's all spaces sort of don't make sense unless they're filled. And then he also like says that the club is a place where you play with love, even if it's like in a different language than in other worlds. But I think there's also this question of just like constant sort of, even if it's not in the language of English, there's this like sort of, people say like that in the United States there's a question mark at the end of everything, like there's a kind of still like putting it out there. Maybe it's not even waiting for it to come back, but this like sort of questioning, provocation, like it's like subtly aggressive, I think, a little bit. And it's not just like just in the language, but in the behavior, as I said. And so I think then, like the question changes, like what happens when you're in a place where you don't have like the same kind, you're aware that like you don't have the same kind of language for that like pushing back. And so like then the question becomes like how do you feel the pushing back? Or like how do you become like how do you find the language or the way to search for the material or the method in which like there is a call and response happening? And so like when you do that, like you become really sensitive. Like these gloves are really sensitive. Like they have these like little like tendrils, right? So they're like extremely sensitive. They pick up matter too. Obviously, like this is extremely sensitive because it's like full of things. So there's this like hypersensitivity that happens, and it's obviously like not just at the club, right? It's like all the time. You're like this, and I think everyone's sort of in this state all the time of being in this like hypersensitive state of like sort of trying to sense the way in which the wind is blowing. So like putting out like just the most delicate little tendrils so you can like sense how the wind is blowing and then understand where you are. And so like everyone's walking around being like extremely sensitive all the time, whether they pretend they are or not. And like feeling the wind. But then sometimes we also we experiment and we make our own wind to see how it moves. Does different stuff and you sort of notice and figure it out. But the thing about doing that kind of experiment is it doesn't really move in the same way as when you're dancing, because it's like a construction, you're experimenting, and I don't know, the fan was kind of doinky, it didn't really do that much. But then when you dance, when we're like wandering around, being sensitive, is that like, even if like our big sensitive coat comes off, like there's still like these other smaller sensitivities, and they're sort of like more private, and they're kind of like hidden more deeply. But it's like, they're also like they're longer, right? Like you sort of like, you feel it more deeply, the subtleties of how it moves. And it's in our heads, right? So it's really like a theater. You really feel it like play out, and you wonder what it means, and yeah, it's confusing, but it's sort of like there all the time, even underneath like the more like everyday, like simpler sensitivities that we're feeling. And it also responds to how the wind's blowing. And it's also like, the whole point is sort of like that it shows you how the wind's blowing, and it's just like there underneath the surface also. Yeah. So yeah, I've been like, just sort of I've just been like thinking about this a lot, because, well, I take care of babies when they're really newborns, and like their skin is really sensitive, so you have to use like different detergent for their skin, and like different soap for the dishes, or like the bottles, and like you sort of like have to like cover their little skin in like oil and cream when they go outside, because like the feeling of how the wind is blowing like takes over their whole body, and like their nervous systems are so small that it like everything that they feel and experience like moves through them, and they like, it shapes their nervous system. So this like makes grooves in how they respond, and but like you can sort of like layer them up, and also like the more that you like massage on like the warm oil, then it like creates this layer of protection. And sort of like the more you like caress them, like the more they feel and the less they feel at the same time. And it's like part of the instructions for like this like way of like bringing like young children into the world, right? Because you want to give them like the best start that you can, but it's also like super annoying, and they like cry all the time, and it's like really messy, and usually like there's no time to do it, because like all you have while you're like sitting at home all day, but like there's no time somehow, and it's a little bit unclear where the time goes. But it's kind of cool that like there's this like layering of surface, and like how surface changes, then like also like how these like layers of sensitivity also change, and like they can build up and like dissolve.